The desert stretched endlessly under a pale morning sky, broken only by the weathered fence posts that marked the boundaries of what had once been a thriving ranch. Now, at 72, Marcus Webb stood at the edge of his property, his calloused hands gripping the top rail of a corral that had seen better days. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, but today it also carried something else: anticipation. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Inside the enclosure, a mare paced restlessly. Her coat was the color of storm clouds mixed with honey, and her belly was round with the promise of new life. Marcus had named her Storm when he brought her home from the government auction 3 months ago, though the papers still listed her as Lot 47. She was a Pryor Mountain Mustang, one of the last truly wild herds, and everything about her spoke of freedom that had never been fully tamed. The auction had been a mistake, Marcus told himself. At his age, with his arthritis and his pension barely covering the feed bills, he had no business taking on a pregnant wild horse. But when the auctioneer had described her as difficult to handle and probably not worth the trouble, something in Marcus had stirred. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him from across the holding pen, her dark eyes holding a challenge that reminded him of his younger self. Dr. Sarah Chun emerged from the small barn, carrying her veterinary bag and checking her watch. She was fresh out of school, all textbook knowledge and eager professionalism, and she'd been coming by daily for the past week to monitor Storm's condition. Her vitals are strong, she called out, but she's showing all the signs. Today's the day. Marcus nodded but didn't take his eyes off Storm. The mare had stopped pacing and was now standing perfectly still, her sides heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. Her ears swiveled constantly, listening for dangers that only she could sense. In all his years working with horses, first in the army and then on various ranches across Montana, Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs that others missed. Today, everything felt different. She won't go down easy, Marcus said, his voice rough from years of desert air. Wild ones like her, they don't trust the ground when they're vulnerable. Sarah frowned, consulting her tablet. The birthing stall is ready. Clean straw, proper lighting, all the equipment we need. If we can just get her inside. She won't go, Marcus interrupted gently. Look at her feet. Storm had positioned herself in the center of the corral, as far from any wall or enclosed space as possible. Her legs were planted wide, her head high, scanning for escape routes even as her body prepared for birth. She'd been a captive for months, but her spirit remained unbroken. The first real contraction hit Storm like a wave. She staggered, letting out a low sound that was part groan, part growl. Sarah stepped forward instinctively, but Marcus caught her arm. Wait, he said. She needs to know we're not going to corner her. Storm's breathing became labored, her nostrils flaring wide. Another contraction followed quickly, stronger this time, and she dropped to her front knees before scrambling back to her feet with a wild shake of her head. Her eyes were wide with something that looked like panic, but Marcus recognized it as something deeper, the ancient fear of being trapped when escape might mean survival. This isn't normal, Sarah muttered, making notes. She should be lying down by now. The stress could complicate everything. Marcus watched Storm circle once, then twice, her hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. The mare was fighting her own body's instincts, torn between the need to give birth and the need to stay mobile. It was a battle that could exhaust them both. I'm going in, Marcus decided, reaching for the gate latch. That's not safe, Sarah protested. She could kick or... She could, Marcus agreed, but she won't. Not if I show her the right kind of respect. He entered the corral slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Storm's ears flattened against her head, but she didn't bolt. Marcus didn't approach her directly. Instead, he walked to a spot about 15 feet away and simply sat down in the dirt, cross-legged like a child at story time. For long minutes, nothing happened. Storm continued her restless movement, but her circles gradually became smaller. Each contraction made her stumble, and each time she fought to stay upright. Marcus remained motionless, a quiet presence that asked nothing and threatened less. Then, as if making a decision that surprised them both, Storm walked closer. Not all the way, she maintained her distance, but close enough that Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes alongside the determination. She studied him for a moment, This old man who had bought her freedom from one cage only to put her in another, albeit a kinder one. "I know," Marcus whispered, so softly the words barely carried. "I know you don't trust any of this. But sometimes we have to take a chance on someone, even when we're scared." Storm's next contraction was the strongest yet. She dropped to her knees, then her side, the decision finally made for her by biology and exhaustion. The birth that followed was unlike anything Sarah had witnessed in her clinical training. It was raw, primal, and absolutely determined. Storm labored with the fierce concentration of a creature that had learned early that weakness meant death. Marcus watched from his spot in the dirt, not moving closer even when every instinct told him to help. This was Storm's moment, her triumph, and his role was simply to witness it. The foal emerged in a rush of fluid and limbs, a wet, trembling bundle that began moving before it had fully entered the world. Storm immediately began the ancient ritual of cleaning her offspring, her tongue rough but gentle as she worked. The newborn was small but perfectly formed, its coat a rich chestnut that would darken with age. But it was the eyes that stopped everyone cold. As the foal lifted its head and blinked away the remnants of birth, it revealed eyes that didn't match, one a deep brown like its mother's, the other a startling ice blue that seemed to catch and hold the light. "Heterochromia," Sarah breathed, her professional demeanor forgotten in the face of something so rare. "I've never seen it in person." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of something precious and fragile. The foal struggled to its feet on legs that seemed too long for its body, wobbling but determined. It was a fighter, just like its mother. Storm nuzzled her baby, guiding it toward her side for its first meal. The mare's transformation was remarkable, from wild and untrusting to protective and fierce in the span of minutes. She kept one eye on Marcus and Sarah, but her attention was focused entirely on the small life she'd just brought into the world. "What will you call him?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus studied the foal, watching it fumble its way through the basics of standing and walking. There was something about those mismatched eyes, something that spoke of seeing the world differently, of beauty that came from being unique rather than perfect. "Sage," he said finally. "Like the plant. Grows wild, survives anything, and knows things others don't." Storm lifted her head at the sound of the name, her ears pricked forward. For the first time since Marcus had brought her home, she looked directly at him without fear or challenge in her gaze. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. A beginning. The afternoon sun was warming the corral when the peaceful scene was shattered by Storm's sudden, piercing call. It was a sound Marcus had heard before, in his military days when horses sensed approaching danger. Storm was on her feet instantly, placing herself between her foal and something only she could detect. Marcus rose slowly, his joints protesting after sitting so long. Sarah was already scanning the horizon, trying to identify what had triggered Storm's alarm. The ranch stretched out in all directions, seemingly empty, but Storm's body language told a different story. Her ears were pinned back, her muscles coiled for flight or fight. Then Marcus saw it, a flash of movement near the old equipment shed, too deliberate to be an animal. Someone was watching them, and Storm, with her wild instincts still sharp, had sensed the intrusion long before human eyes could confirm it. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of an engine and the faint scent of cigarette smoke. Marcus felt a cold recognition settle in his stomach. After all these years, after convincing himself that the past was buried, it seemed that some ghosts refused to stay dead. Storm's warning call echoed across the desert once more, and this time Marcus understood exactly what she was trying to tell him. Marcus squinted toward the equipment shed, his weathered hand instinctively moving to his hip where he used to carry a sidearm during his army days. The movement was automatic, muscle memory from decades past, but his holster was empty now. He'd been a civilian for too long. "What is it?" Sarah asked, following his gaze toward the distant structure. Before Marcus could answer, a figure stepped out from behind the shed with deliberate slowness, hands raised in a gesture that was meant to appear peaceful but felt anything but. The man was tall and lean, wearing dark jeans and a leather vest that had seen too many miles of hard road. Even from a distance, Marcus recognized the confident swagger, the way he moved like he owned whatever ground he stood on. "Stay here with Storm and the foal," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Sarah take a step back. Do you know him? Marcus didn't answer. He was already walking toward the gate, his movements careful but purposeful. The man approached across the open ground between them, and with each step, more details became clear. The graying beard, the silver chain at his neck, the boots that cost more than most people made in a month, and those pale green eyes that Marcus remembered all too well. Well, I'll be damned, the stranger called out when they were still 50 yards apart. Marcus Webb, still playing rancher in the middle of nowhere. Marcus stopped walking but didn't respond. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Name's Danny Rourke, the man continued, as if they were meeting for the first time. Heard you picked up something special at the government auction. Word travels fast in certain circles. Circles you shouldn't be moving in anymore, Marcus replied, his voice steady. Danny smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come now, Marcus. We both know the federal boys lost interest in me years ago. Mexico was good to me. Gave me time to think, make new connections, build a better business model. Behind them, Storm let out another warning call. The foal, sensing his mother's distress, pressed closer to her side. Sarah had her phone out, but Marcus caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Not yet. That's quite a specimen you've got there, Danny said, nodding toward the corral. Pryor Mountain bloodline, if I'm not mistaken. And the foal. He paused, studying Sage with the calculating gaze of someone who saw profit in everything. Those eyes are something special. Genetic lottery ticket, you might say. They're not for sale. Danny laughed, a sound like gravel in a metal bucket. Everything's for sale, Marcus. Just a matter of finding the right price. You know what kind of money moves through the exotic breeding market these days? What certain research facilities pay for unique genetic specimens? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd hoped he'd never have to think about this world again. The underground network of dealers, buyers, and brokers who traded in rare animals like they were commodities. Danny had been a small player back then, working the edges of the legitimate horse trade, but his ambitions had always been bigger than his conscience. I know what you used to do, Marcus said. Stealing Mustangs from public lands, falsifying papers, shipping them overseas to buyers who didn't ask questions. I also know why you disappeared. Ancient history, Danny waved dismissively. I'm a legitimate businessman now. Import-export. Completely legal. With fake papers and offshore accounts. You always were too suspicious for your own good. Danny's smile faded slightly. Look, I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here to make you an offer. That foal represents a significant investment opportunity. The kind that could set you up for the rest of your days. Marcus glanced back at Storm and Sage. The mare was standing guard over her baby, every line of her body radiating protective fury. She'd lived wild for years, surviving predators and harsh weather. But now she faced a different kind of threat, one that came in human form with smooth words and poisonous intentions. The foal stays here, Marcus said simply. Danny studied him for a long moment, his expression shifting from friendly persuasion to something colder. You know, I did some research before coming out here. This place is mortgaged to the roof. Property taxes 3 months behind. Feed bills mounting up. You're barely hanging on, Marcus. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Marcus had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months, stretching every dollar until it screamed. The ranch that had once supported a family now barely supported one old man and his handful of animals. 50,000, Danny said quietly. Cash. Today. Just for the foal. You keep the mare, pay off your debts, live comfortable for whatever time you have left. $50,000. Marcus tried not to let the number affect him, but it was more money than he'd seen at one time in years. It would solve every immediate problem, give him breathing room he desperately needed. And what happens to Sage? The foal gets the best care money can buy. Top-tier facilities, expert veterinary attention, genetic testing that could benefit the entire species. He'd be contributing to science. In a cage. In a controlled environment designed for his optimal development. Marcus looked at Danny's face, reading the lies beneath the practice sales pitch. He'd seen enough of the illegal trade to know what optimal development really meant. Endless breeding cycles, constant medical procedures, a life reduced to genetic material and profit margins. No, Marcus said. Think about it for a few days. I'm staying at the motel in town. Room 12. The offer stands until Friday. The answer will still be no. Danny's expression hardened completely now, the mask finally dropping. You're making a mistake, old man. That foal is worth more than your pride, and there are people who won't take no for an answer as politely as I am. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. The world's changed since you played Soldier Boy. There are bigger players in this game now, and they don't all share my respect for old-fashioned courtesy. Storm's call pierced the air again, sharper this time. The mare had moved to the fence closest to them, her body tense with aggression. She might not understand the words being spoken, but she understood the tone, the posture, the way Danny looked at her foal like he was already calculating its value. Your horse doesn't like me, Danny observed with amusement. Smart animals can sense bad intentions, Marcus replied. Danny laughed again, but there was no humor in it now. Friday, Marcus, think about what matters more, your conscience or your survival. He turned and walked back toward the shed, where Marcus now noticed a black pickup truck parked in the shadows. The engine started with a low rumble, and Danny drove away without looking back, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering scent of trouble. Sarah approached cautiously, her phone still in her hand. Should I call the sheriff? Marcus watched the dust settle where Danny's truck had disappeared. Not yet. Let's see if he keeps his word about Friday. But even as he said it, Marcus knew Danny Rourke had never been a man to wait patiently when he wanted something. The visit had been a courtesy call, a chance for Marcus to do the smart thing voluntarily. When Friday came and went without a deal, the real pressure would begin. Storm had calmed slightly, but she remained alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning danger. Sage, oblivious to the threat he represented, was exploring his new legs with the fearless curiosity of youth. Marcus returned to the corral and sat down in the same spot where he'd witnessed the foal's birth. The peaceful afternoon felt different now, charged with the electricity of approaching storms. He'd spent years trying to leave his past behind, but the past had a way of tracking you down, especially when it came wearing familiar faces and carrying old grudges. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Marcus finally stood up, his decision made. If Danny wanted Sage, he'd have to go through Storm first. And if he wanted to go through Storm, he'd have to go through Marcus. Some fights were worth having, regardless of the odds. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the ranch bathed in the purple shadows of twilight. Marcus moved through his evening routine with methodical precision, but every action carried extra weight tonight. He checked the water troughs twice, secured the feed bins, and walked the fence line with more attention than usual. Storm and Sage had settled in the corral, the mare keeping her foal close as they navigated the awkward dance of a first evening together. Sarah had offered to stay, but Marcus had sent her home. This wasn't her fight, and if things went badly, he didn't want a young veterinarian caught in the crossfire. Some situations required the kind of experience that only came from years of making hard choices in difficult places. Inside the small ranch house, Marcus opened a wooden chest that had sat untouched in his closet for nearly a decade. Beneath old uniforms and faded photographs lay a Remington rifle, cleaned and oiled despite years of disuse. He'd hoped never to touch it again, but hope and necessity rarely aligned in his experience. The rifle felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory returning despite the passage of time. He loaded it carefully, methodically, the way he'd been trained 40 years ago in places where carelessness meant death. Then he positioned himself on the front porch, the weapon across his knees, and settled in to wait. The night stretched long and quiet. Every sound seemed amplified. The wind through the fence posts, the creak of the old windmill, the occasional shuffle from the corral where Storm kept her restless vigil. Marcus dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at each noise, his body remembering the hyper-vigilance of younger days. Around midnight, Storm's warning call shattered the silence. It was different from her earlier alerts, sharper, more urgent. Marcus was on his feet instantly, the rifle ready, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the reach of the single security light. The sound came first, the low rumble of engines approaching with headlights dark. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, moving slowly down the gravel road that led to the ranch. They stopped just outside the gate, far enough away to avoid the security light, but close enough to announce their presence. Car doors slammed in the darkness. Voices carried on the night air, too distant to make out words, but clear enough to count numbers. At least 4 men, possibly more. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the cold clarity that came when preparation met reality. Marcus, Danny's voice called out from the darkness. Let's talk this through like civilized people. Marcus said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence could be more unnerving than words, especially for men who expected immediate responses to their demands. I brought some associates, Danny continued. Businessmen, like myself. They're very interested in your foal. Storm's agitation was growing. She paced the corral with quick, nervous steps, keeping Sage pressed against the far fence. The foal sensed his mother's distress and voiced small, questioning calls that cut through Marcus like knives. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Danny called. We're prepared to double the offer. 100,000, cash, right now. Walk away rich, Marcus. Walk away smart. The money hung in the air like bait on a hook. $100,000 would solve every problem Marcus faced, set him up for a comfortable retirement, maybe even let him fix up the ranch properly. All for one foal that would probably be better cared for than Marcus could manage anyway. But as these thoughts crossed his mind, Marcus looked toward the corral where Storm stood guard over her baby. The mare had trusted him enough to give birth in his presence, had looked to him for protection when danger threatened. Some things couldn't be bought or sold, and trust was at the top of that list. Time's up, Danny called, his voice harder now. We're coming in. The security light suddenly blazed to life as motion sensors detected movement near the gate. 3 men were visible in the harsh glare, all carrying tools, bolt cutters, crowbars, flashlights. They moved with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this sort of work before. Marcus stood up from his chair and stepped into the light where they could see him clearly. The rifle was obvious in his hands, no longer concealed or disguised. That's far enough, he called. The men stopped, but didn't retreat. One of them, younger than the others with the lean build of someone who lived on adrenaline, laughed. You gonna shoot us over a horse, old man? That depends, Marcus replied steadily. You planning to steal one? Danny emerged from the shadows beyond the light, his hands empty, but his posture confident. Nobody's stealing anything. We're conducting a legitimate business transaction. You're just being unreasonable about the terms. My property, my terms. Your mortgage holder might disagree. The words hit home because they were true. The bank that held his note wouldn't care about Storm and Sage's welfare when the monthly payments stopped coming. But that was tomorrow's problem, and tonight had enough troubles of its own. Storm let out another piercing call, and this time Sage answered with his own small voice. The sound seemed to affect one of Danny's men, a stocky figure who'd been standing near the gate. He shifted uncomfortably and said something Marcus couldn't hear. What's the problem, Joey? Danny asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Nothing, boss. It's just, that foal sounds scared. It's a horse, not a puppy. Do your job. But Joey had taken a step back from the gate, his resolve clearly shaken. Marcus recognized the moment, the instant when a man realized he was on the wrong side of something important. It happened in war, in business, in life. The smart ones listened to that voice. You hear that sound? Marcus called to the men. That's a mother protecting her baby. That's something understanding its life is in danger. You really want to be the kind of men who cause that fear. The youngest man stepped forward aggressively. Save the sermon, preacher. We came here to collect valuable property. You came here to steal a newborn from its mother, Marcus corrected. Call it what it is. Storm's calls were becoming more frantic now. She'd backed Sage into the corner of the corral and was standing over him, her body language screaming defiance and desperation. The sight of it seemed to affect even Danny, who glanced toward the corral with something that might have been discomfort. Last chance, Marcus, Danny said. Take the money and walk away clean. Marcus thought about the mortgage, the feed bills, the slow decay of everything he'd worked to build. Then he looked at Storm and Sage, and the choice became simple. Last chance, Danny, he replied. Get off my land and don't come back. For a moment, the night balanced on a knife's edge. Then Joey stepped further back from the gate. Boss, I'm not feeling right about this. What? Look at them, Joey said, nodding toward the corral. That mare's terrified. The foal's just a baby. This isn't what I signed up for. You signed up to follow orders, Danny snapped. Not to terrorize animals. Joey was already walking back toward the vehicles. Find another way to make your money. The young man started to follow, but Danny grabbed his arm. Where do you think you're going? Same place he is, the man said, shaking free. This feels wrong, Danny. Dead wrong. As the two men retreated into the darkness, Marcus felt something shift in the confrontation. What had been 4 against 1 was now closer to even odds, and Danny's confidence was showing cracks. You can't protect them forever, Danny called, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. I can protect them tonight, Marcus replied. Tomorrow we'll see. Danny stood in the harsh security light for another long moment, weighing his options. Then he stepped back into the shadows. This isn't over, Marcus. The sound of engines starting carried across the night air, followed by the crunch of gravel as the vehicles departed. Marcus remained standing in the light until the sounds faded completely, then slowly lowered the rifle. Storm's calls had quieted to soft murmurs as she nuzzled Sage, reassuring him that the danger had passed. For now, Marcus knew Danny would be back. Men like him didn't accept defeat easily, especially when significant money was involved. But tonight had been won, and sometimes that was enough. The old soldier settled back into his chair, rifle across his knees, and resumed his watch. Dawn was still hours away. The first light of dawn crept across the desert like a gentle promise, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Marcus had dozed fitfully in his chair through the remaining hours of darkness, jerking awake at every sound, but no one had returned. The ranch lay peaceful in the morning stillness, as if the previous night's confrontation had been nothing more than a bad dream. Storm stood quietly in the corral, finally relaxed enough to graze on the hay Marcus had scattered earlier. Sage explored his small world with the boundless curiosity of youth, his mismatched eyes bright with wonder as he discovered his own shadow, the texture of wood fence posts, the way dust felt beneath his hooves. Marcus stretched the stiffness from his joints and walked to the corral. Storm looked up at his approach, but didn't move away. The mare seemed to understand that this weathered old man had stood between her foal and danger, and something like gratitude flickered in her dark eyes. We made it through the night, Marcus said softly, extending his hand toward the fence. Storm considered for a moment, then took a step closer, close enough that her breath warmed his fingers. It was the first time she'd voluntarily approached him, and the simple gesture felt like a victory worth celebrating. The sound of tires on gravel announced another visitor, but this time Marcus felt no alarm. The white pickup truck that pulled up to the gate bore the logo of the county sheriff's department, and Deputy Elena Vasquez stepped out wearing the crisp uniform and confident bearing of someone who'd earned her badge through years of hard work. "Morning, Marcus," she called, walking toward the house. "Heard you might have had some excitement last night." Marcus met her halfway across the yard, grateful that small-town communication networks still functioned when they needed to. News travels fast. Joey Brennan showed up at the station around 3 this morning, Elena explained. Said he'd been involved in something he wasn't proud of and wanted to come clean. Told quite a story about Danny Rourke and some kind of business proposition gone wrong. Marcus nodded. He'd hoped Joey would find his conscience, but hadn't been certain the young man would follow through. What did he say exactly? Enough to get me interested. Rourke's been asking questions around town about your horses, flashing money, making inquiries about your financial situation. That kind of behavior gets noticed. They walked toward the corral, where Storm continued her patient supervision of Sage's explorations. Elena whistled softly when she saw the foal. Now I understand what all the fuss is about. Those eyes are something special. Special enough to attract the wrong kind of attention, apparently. Elena studied the animals for a moment, then turned back to Marcus. Joey says Rourke was talking about research facilities, genetic testing, serious money. Is that something you're considering? Not for a second. Good. Because I did some checking on Mr. Rourke this morning. Turns out he's got quite a history with animal trafficking. Federal charges from 5 years ago, fled to Mexico before trial. Only came back recently under an assumed identity. The feds are very interested in finding him. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but it did move. So what happens now? Now I put out some calls to people who've been looking for Danny Rourke for a very long time, Elena said. And I make sure everyone in the county knows to keep an eye on your place. You won't be dealing with this alone. The relief Marcus felt was immediate and profound. He'd spent so many years handling problems by himself that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have backup, to know that others were willing to stand with him when things got difficult. Elena stayed for another hour, taking a detailed statement and making notes about the previous night's events. When she finally left, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that he wasn't fighting his battles alone. Over the following days, a quiet transformation took place at the ranch. Storm's trust grew incrementally, expressed in small gestures, allowing Marcus to brush her coat, accepting treats from his hand, even letting him approach Sage without showing alarm. The foal, blessed with the fearlessness of youth, showed no such hesitation. He seemed drawn to Marcus, often approaching the fence when the old man appeared, eager for attention and interaction. Marcus found himself looking forward to these moments. There was something healing about watching Sage discover the world, something that filled empty spaces in his heart that he'd learned to ignore. The foal's joy was infectious, his energy a reminder that life held possibilities worth fighting for. Sarah visited daily, monitoring both animals' health and marveling at their progress. "I've never seen a wild mare adapt this quickly," she admitted on Thursday afternoon. "Storm's usually wild horses take months to show this level of trust." "Maybe she knows we're on the same side now," Marcus suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe she's just a good judge of character." That evening, as Marcus performed his routine checks around the property, he noticed something that stopped him cold. Pinned to the barn door with a rusty nail was a white envelope, crisp and new against the weathered wood. No one had approached the house during the day, he was certain of that. Yet there it was, like a ghost's calling card. Inside the envelope was a single photograph. It showed Storm in her wild state, standing proud on a distant ridge with wind whipping her mane. On the back, written in block letters with a black marker, were 5 words, "This isn't over, old man." Marcus stared at the photo for a long moment, feeling the cold weight of inevitability settle in his chest. Danny Rourke hadn't given up. If anything, the federal interest in his activities had probably made him more desperate, more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose was capable of anything. But as Marcus looked toward the corral where Storm and Sage stood together in the gathering twilight, he realized something important had changed. 3 months ago, he'd been a lonely old man marking time until death caught up with him. Now he had something worth protecting, something that had given his life meaning again. He walked to the corral and leaned against the fence. Storm approached without hesitation now, accepting his presence as natural and welcome. Sage bounded over with the enthusiasm of a puppy, pushing his small muzzle against Marcus's hand in search of attention. "You know what you've done, don't you?" Marcus said softly to the foal. "You've made an old man remember what it feels like to have something to fight for." Sage blinked his mismatched eyes, one brown like his mother's, one the color of winter sky. There was something almost human in that gaze, an intelligence that seemed to understand far more than any young animal should. Marcus folded the photograph and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Tomorrow he would call Elena, tell her about this latest message, take whatever precautions were necessary. But tonight, he would simply enjoy the company of 2 magnificent creatures who had chosen to trust him. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant storms and the promise of challenges yet to come. Marcus didn't know what form those challenges would take, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Danny Rourke would have to go through him to get to Storm and Sage. And Marcus Webb was no longer the broken-down old man who'd bought a pregnant mare on a whim 3 months ago. He was a protector now, a guardian of something precious and rare. The responsibility filled him with purpose he hadn't felt in years. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus remained at the fence, watching over his charges. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Some fights were worth having, and some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. The wind whispered across the desert, carrying promises and threats in equal measure, but Marcus was no longer afraid. He was ready.